of joining us from different parts of the world. My name is Daniela Ngarambe, and I'm a research associate at the African School of Regulation. It is my great pleasure to welcome you on this second day of our international online conference on off-grid solar systems, co-organized by GOGLA and the African School of Regulation. We had a very informative session yesterday where we focused more on OGS business models as well as payment methods, but we also discussed demand and subsidies required to grow the sector. Today, we have 3 exciting panels. The first one will discuss regulations and conditions under which OGS solutions can be scalable and sustainable. The second panel will discuss the potential impacts of cross-sectoral regulations. Some prefer the term indirect regulations, their impact on investment and growth of the standalone solar industry, PUE inclusive. And last but not least, we'll discuss how to make all of this work. This is more of an action-oriented panel. And before I pass the mic to our first moderator, James, allow me to share some housekeeping notes. Firstly, the moderators will only introduce the speakers by their names, positions, and organizations. More information on our speakers can be found on our website. This will allow us to go straight into the conversation. Secondly, we'll have a few minutes for coffee breaks, and we count on moderators to keep track of time. Please note that the event is recorded and that we will make these recordings available to the public on our website. Please feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens to ask questions. And interpretation for our French speakers is available, so please feel free to use the interpretation option as well. And lastly, enjoy the session. And over to you, James.
Yes, thank you very much, Daniel. And to kick the ball rolling, just a bit about myself as a moderator. My name is James Manda. I'm from the African Forum for Utility Regulators. We are a Pan-African organization. And I want to take this opportunity to ask the participants in this panel, the panelists, just to say under 1 minute who they are. I think that will be okay. Under 1 minute, who you are, and just briefly what you do, so that we know and we get the ball rolling. Can we start with you, Patrick?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you to the African School of Regulation for hosting us. My name is Patrick Tonwe, and I am with GOGLA, which is the Industry Association for the Off-Grid Solar Industry. Our members really are providing energy access products and services to those who are really living beyond the reach of grid and the mini-grids space. And this conversation is quite important, really, about how do we make sure that we have an ecosystem that facilitates for energy delivery to these communities, and how do we make it sustainable and scalable, and really about wrestling with how do we leave no one behind, but also have a marketplace that is coherent. Thank you very much. Back to you, James.
All right, next, Colin. Hello, Colin, can you hear me? Okay.
I think it's Isaiah, right?
Yeah, it's Isaiah.
Yeah, Isaiah. Can you introduce Isaiah Nyakusendwa?
Yes,
Can
please.
you introduce yourself, please? Yes, there you are.
No, thanks very much, and thank you for the African School of Regulations for hosting us. My name is Isaiah Nyakusendwa, and I chair the Renewable Energy Association of Zimbabwe. It's an umbrella body for off-grid companies and the private sector players, and we're basically promoting the uptake of renewable energy technologies, ensuring that, of course, we do achieve the SDG goals, and and have access to electricity for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Isaiah. The next one is it Benjamin?
It is Telma from Mozambique.
Okay, let me look for Thelma from Mozambique. Are you around?
Yes, I am.
Okay, please go ahead and introduce yourself, what you do also.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. I also want to thank the African School of Regulation to hosting us and especially to invite Taren to attend this important discussion. It's important to note that Mozambique is in the process of implementation of a new regulatory framework on off-grid. So for us, it's very important to attend discussions like this. My name is Telman Kutumula. I'm the Director for Legal Affairs and Consumer Support at AREN in Mozambique. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thelma. Professor, do we have another one?
No, you are complete. You and
Okay,
the three
great.
panelists.
All right. So I'll ask Isaiah to just put your video on, because at a certain point, I think there will be need to get a picture of the panelists. So that will be good. So as a way of introduction for the off-grid solar systems towards sustainable and scalable business models, I think off-grid solar systems have emerged as a compelling solution to address energy poverty and environmental sustainability challenges, particularly in the remote areas of Africa and elsewhere. And you know, we are faced with a limited access to the electricity grid, especially in the African continent. So therefore, these off-grid solar systems, which generate and store energy locally, have the potential to provide clean, reliable, and affordable power to millions of people worldwide. To ensure the successful implementation and widespread adoption of off-grid solar systems, it is crucial to develop sustainable and scalable business models that can drive economic viability and facilitate long-term growth in this sector. And so it is self-evident how important sustainable and scalable business models are. And these off-grid solar companies who operate and grow while ensuring positive social, environmental, and economic impacts. The models should focus on optimizing resource efficiency, reducing waste, and providing long-term benefits to communities in which they operate. Additionally, scalable business models allow companies to expand their operations and reach more customers, thereby maximizing the impact of off-grid solar systems. Now, I sat throughout the sessions yesterday, and before I ask my panelists to contribute, I just want to highlight a few issues, and these are very important. That is my take from yesterday's proceedings. The first issue that I observed and that worried me a lot was the ownership and prices. Customers have had an expectation that they will own the systems eventually, but this is not happening from yesterday's discussion. Regarding prices, I wondered, how can consumers benefit from the falling prices for solar products? Yesterday, when we started the discussions, the lady who made a presentation said solar systems around the world, the prices are coming down. But when we got into presentations, it was very evident that the tariffs for standalone solar systems or off-grid solar systems are still very high. So how can consumers benefit from the falling prices for solar products? What can we do? Because scalability and sustainability means that there must be a balance between the ownership and prices that are saved around the world. The second thing is that, there's no, as far as ownership is concerned, the contracts that the customers sign do not have any provision to transfer equipment to the users. And so it seems like solar or off-grid solar systems are just a stopgap measure. We make it look like customers must wait for the grid electricity to come. And that is what brings about what I called, it's frustrating for the customers. It's frustrating to wait for the grid arrival whilst having to use equipment that does not belong to them. So these are some of the texts that I got yesterday. And the last one was, what is an appropriate subsidy to resolve the issue of prices? What is the appropriate subsidy to resolve the issue of prices? Are governments or regulators around the world, are they ready to put up large amounts of resources to subsidize the electricity offered by off-grid power systems? Because it was very evident yesterday that the price offered by grid electricity is much lower than the price offered by off-grid solar systems. The disparity is very large and glaring. What can we do to convince governments that we need subsidies to equalize the prices for off-grid as well as on-grid solar systems? So that was my take as an introduction to the panelists. And so let me go straight to Tema. And from Mozambique, I understand. Just give us a discourse of what is happening in Mozambique in terms of sustainability and scalable business models as far as the off-grid solar systems are concerned. Tema?
Thank you, James. Well, as I mentioned in my introduction, very recently, Mozambique started a reform in off-grid subsector, let's say. In 2021, the government approved the so-called off-grid regulation. And from there up to today, we are still approving additional regulations. For instance, last year and this year already published, we have the concession regulation for mini grids. We also have the interconnection regulation, the quality service regulation, technical norms regulation, tariff regulation, all this for off-grid. Of course, this is not enough. We still have to complete the legal framework because there are many other things that should be regulated in order to have the appropriate framework, at least legal and regulatory framework, to allow the market work and mainly the investment happen. So, however, before this legislation reform, we of course already have some operators in Mozambique of grid subsector. As you may know, Mozambique has a very challenge in electrification, considering the territorial extension. We have a very huge territorial extension. We also have a very dispersed population in rural areas. So the grid itself will not be enough to electrify all the countries. That's why also we have these so-called off-grid solutions and mini grids. Before the regulatory reform, we have a legal framework that was based on the electricity law that brings, let's say, not brings, but it's not easy for an investor to go through electricity law, considering the charges and also the bureaucracy that is needed for electrification in areas that has so many difficulties to do. We also have some operators, some companies that are distributing these so-called solar home systems, as well as improved stoves around the country. Up to 2021, they started to do this activity, but without any regulation, without any rules. So now we are trying to bring all together and try to organize the market in order to assure also that issues as certification of equipment, waste management, as well as the control and monitor of the activity itself can be followed by the government and also for the regulatory authority. It's important also to mention that AREN, the regulatory authority that I'm representing here, was created in 2017. So before AREN exists, a lot of these activities that AREN today do was done by the ministry, but of course, the existence of a regulator is very important also to bring security for the investors. So we started in 2021 in terms of regulation, but the activity, the operators are already in the field for long years. And we can say that today we have some companies that are already registered, because the way that the regulation was issued brings two ways for electrification. One, through mini grids up to 10 megawatts with 3 categories in order to facilitate the procedures. And another way of electrification is through the energy services. So the energy energy services are subject to registration at AREN with no costs, free of taxes also, but there is a need of comply with the plan, waste management plan, as well as use certified equipment, report annually to AREN the activity and inform all the necessary changes during the activity. So this is, in a nutshell, what we are doing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thelma. I'll come back to you later. But let me go to Patrick now, whilst Isaiah is getting ready as well. Patrick, you come from GOGLA, which is, I think, is it the Global Off-Grid Lighting Association? Yes. From your perspective, of course, we know very well that financing mechanisms and access to finance is often a significant barrier for off-grid solar companies seeking to establish and scale their operations. Just give us your take on what sustainability and scalability for business models looks like, taking into account that the financing mechanisms could be a very big barrier to off-grid solar companies.
Thank you very much, James, for the question. And I think I want to first start by obviously appreciating some of the work, for example, that has happened in Mozambique with AREN, Mireme, and FUNAI, and the other work that they're really doing around their energy access plan. And I think we've seen this in many countries. But I think as I start, I want to also just make sure that we reflect on some key things. Number one, I think in your remarks, James, you've referenced, for example, the concerns about the tariff that consumers could be paying, the pricing, and whether the consumers own the products at the end. And I think we need to recognize the different channels and approaches that have been being taken. You have primarily in our industry, particularly here when we talk about solar home systems, component-based systems, which may be a bit larger, be it rooftop solar products that are for one consumer. In our industry right now, the predominant business model has not been energy as a service. There's a few companies doing it, but it's really agreements with the consumer where, and with flexible payments, which we call pay-go, at the end of that contract period, the product is owned by the consumer. We actually in Gogla, we've been doing a number of things, including really pushing for some regulations and transparency across from the industry. So for example, adoption of standards so that we know that whatever product is being sold and used by the customer is able to deliver an appropriate level of service in terms of lighting hours and the other power available. We've also pushed for what we call a consumer protection code, which really pushes for clear terms in terms of the agreements that they enter, which would be very clear in how long is your contract for, what you will actually pay for that product, both if you pay in cash or if you take financing arrangement, so that those things are really clear to the consumer and it's not confusing. However, at the same time, I think we also need to step back and we look at the bigger context. And when we look and see, for example, when you're looking at pricing, for example, we know generally the numbers for a grid connection may be $1,000 equivalent of or higher. And if you're to ask, is that pricing that you describe as the grid rate, is that a cost reflective tariff or is that the tariff afterwards? But I'm not aware of rural consumers ever being charged that full $1,000 per connection. It's always lower than that. So when we try and look at what is the cost on the standalone side, off-grid solar side, because the baseline is always the cost of essentially the product and delivering that product, and also being able to make sure that you're there and available for meaningful after sales service and support. And most of the companies, all the companies in our sector are really trying to make sure that they price that in a way that is sustainable. But we are also seeing that there's a difference between if you're to charge that rate and then you look at the customers that we're trying to serve, that the ability to pay, the ability to afford that is a gap, and the industry just doesn't have the money to sell products and support them below the cost of delivering the product, which is where we're asking for where does the appropriate subsidies or the use of affordability measures come in, which is super important, and we need to bring that in, which I think is coming to your question now. Really, for us to be sustainable as an industry in the long run, that as we try to reach, and we're really trying to reach consumers who may be living in very hard to reach places, or their ability to afford the product may be below due to just basic poverty levels. How do we essentially give energy access to them, but price it at an appropriate level? What can the industry do using things like efficiency business models, taking advantage of the cost of reduction in cost of products and all, while at the same time, how do you make it sustainable? Because if we don't want businesses closing because they just don't have the ability to be there financially. And it's really, if we can get public policy measures in place that give clear signals to the industry, this is your role, this is how you will be able to, we will support you, how we'll work with you, so that if you go to an investor or a lender and they know that one, your business is sustainable for a long time. If a consumer buys your product, that they are not going to, change or go to somebody else and stop paying, and suddenly you can, that problem is scaling or otherwise, and really allow you to be able to access low-cost financing. If we can even move towards infrastructure type financing, low cost rather than in the higher cost, let's say debt financing that we are currently using, would really help to drive down the overall cost of doing business. Let me pause there and I'll give it back to you, James.
So thank you very much, Patrick, for that discourse. And as we discuss this topic, I would like you to continuously look at the Q&A in the chat box. And if you feel that there are questions that you can provide responses to, that would be great. So there's a question by Tom Stanton, and I think so far that's the question that is there. Just have a look and see if you can provide some responses. Coming to you, Isaiah, I suppose that REAZ is the Rural Education Authority of Zimbabwe. Am I right?
No, REAZ is the Renewable Energy Association of Zimbabwe, which is the umbrella body for private players.
Okay, Renewable Energy Association of Zimbabwe. That's great.
Yes.
All right. So from the perspective of partnerships and the ecosystem development, Isaiah, you know that collaboration with various stakeholders, including governments, NGOs, could be communities and so on and so forth, are very important in order to bring about the success for scalability and the sustainability of the off-grid solar systems. Just take us through how you have had the experience in Zimbabwe so far with the renewable solar systems, I mean, the off-grid solar systems, and maybe other standalone systems. Give us a preview of what is happening in Zimbabwe, what are the challenges, and how you are resolving such issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think just a bit of background. Zimbabwe's population is around 16 million. Over 60% of them are in the rural areas, and those are the ones that have also got low access to electricity compared to their town counterparts. We're still talking of sub 50% access there. Now, what has happened is that in the past, the development of electrification in the rural areas was driven by the Rural Electrification Fund, which gets 6% of our electricity bills that we pay and anyone else who is on the grid pays, going towards development of the rural areas in terms of electrification. Now, that 6% is not sufficient because it's pegged on the currency that we use. So at the end of the day, what has happened is that the Rural Electrification Fund has not been able to cover all areas in as far as electrification is concerned. We have now a situation whereby they have probably been concentrating more on certain interest groups, like, for example, schools and chief homesteads and places like that. And where they have gone out, they have had to have communities contribute or individuals contribute a portion of the cost if they're to go with them. So if we go then back to the legislation, we have the acts that were enacted, some in the 2000s, where we now allow private sector to also participate in electricity generation as either IPPs. And in that regards, we have had mainly commercial, installations as opposed to the mini grids. If one looks at our legislation, the Act needs to be further refined to also recognize generation from renewables. I'll give you an example of the Electricity Act. It does not recognize the issue of generation from renewables, whilst the main act do recognize that we now have private sector players. Why I'm talking about the regulations, it will help also us to protect consumers in as far as standards are concerned and try and enforce also legislation. Now, going back to the spectrum of how the rural area has been developing to date, we have had, and also touching on the point that you have talked about on collaboration, we have had donors coming into the space, and we have had about 1,600 schools, clinics, sorry, not schools, being electrified. But what you'll find is the donors' interest is to ensure that there's lighting at the clinic, and it doesn't extend to, the nurses, it doesn't extend to the nurses' houses, it doesn't extend to the communities. So it's kind of like restricted to the use for which it is meant to be. So the issue of collaboration would be key for us to take some of these developments as nucleuses to further develop, the communities, which speaks also to the issues of, sustainability. For example, one of the things that has come up is the fact that some of those installations, there is no operations and maintenance to make sure that those systems really continue. So we have had a lot of donors coming in and picking up schools, clinics, but then the issues of operations and maintenance come in. And then the other things that come in as well is everyone, maybe supporting one school. You have 5 systems being put up on the school. Linked to all that, we have also had the government also driving the issue of irrigation using solar. So there's focus in those areas as well. And then we have had, off-grid companies, providing solar home systems. But again, these are things, mainly covering lighting, let's say. So we have a rural electrification master plan, which was commissioned some years back. And unfortunately, this is residing under the Rural Electrification Fund. What we would like to see is that plan, or that master plan, being accessible to ensure that obviously, private sector also have access to that master plan, and having collaboration between government and private sector to further develop, mini grids, et cetera, and where areas where, the grid will not be able to get to. I think issues that still need to be taken care of is obviously coming up with, like, say, mini grids policies to ensure that anybody who invests in the sector does not end up with stranded assets. Suppose the government comes in and the grid reaches where you have developed. The issue of mini grids, they have been developed with some satellite, grids that have been set up, but these were set up using donor funds, which becomes also a bit of a distortion in terms of whether that is a sustainable business model or not. Some of the tariffs that are actually obtaining at the moment, where you have had private sector or donors coming up with, mini grids, they are actually quite higher than the current tariffs obtaining from, the grid, as it were. which makes it also that area not viable. The issue of ability to pay is a key issue at the moment, because the focus now is obviously maybe going towards where there's productivity, or linking, electrification with productivity, to make sure that, there is sustainability on that. And then other policies like waste management, and they are not there at the moment. They also need to be developed. We have also seen some discussion under viability gap funding, to ensure that the feasibility studies are subsidized, and to ensure that anybody who wants to invest into the sector comes in with that cost taken off. Yeah, I think the other issues that's there as well is the issue of skills within the remote areas that we are talking about, to ensure that we have skilled people who then can do operations and maintenance without having to rely on people coming from the urban areas to do that work. We have not seen much of energy as a service, apart from the PAYGO systems that have been operating. And again, where models have come up, we have communities where donors have funded projects, and have then given those projects to be owned by the communities and have them to manage them. But again, like I said, we don't have that many that are there. But it's important that we have a collaborating, arrangement in this area, where the big government, the NGOs, the communities come together to make sure that we come up with sustainable models, and then be able to scale up. Funding is also a major challenge, given where we are coming from in going into these areas. When I say funding, I mean appropriate funding. You need the patient capital to be there to enable you to be able then to develop this sector. I think for now, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Isaiah, for that discourse. I'm coming to you, Thelma, from Mozambique. But before I do, I just wanted Isaiah to confirm or, augment the idea that so far with the donor-funded projects, are we targeting just the learning institutions, hospitals, and clinics, or to what extent are the off-grid solar systems used for productive use? Isaiah, just briefly.
Yeah, I think at this stage, this is a discourse that everybody is now getting into. But as we speak, mainly the investment was in clinics, schools. The issue that I've mentioned, that discussion about viability gap funding, is coming up to further extend the existing works that have already been done. So this is an area that we are starting to have engagement in, to see how best can we make sure that these systems can be made available for productive use. Thanks.
Thank you. Back to you, Thelma. You mentioned that you are putting in place some legal frameworks. I'd like you to give us some detailed discourse on some of the frameworks that you have put in place. The first question is, do you have a mini-grid policy, as it were? And in the policy, if it is available, or in your legal framework, do you have any provision for subsidies? And have you had a thought on what happens when the grid arrives? Thelma, I hope the the questions are clear.
Yes, James, thank you. We don't have exactly a mini grid policy. What we have is the off-grid regulation that states the principles of how this subsector should be guided. And as I mentioned before, on off-grid regulation, we have electrification through two modes. One of its mini grids up to 10 megawatts, and another one is the energy services. And to complement this regulation, we call general regulation. We have additional or complementary regulations for each specific aspects that we think that would be important to try to bring more detail and more to precise a little bit more. Going back to your question, yes, we don't have a mini grid policy, but we have this regulation, and there in the regulation, we don't have a provision for subsidies, but we know that the viability for these systems probably will be very important to see how we can and where we can find these subsidies, taking into account the challenge of electrification in off-grid. Going to interconnection, yes, in the general regulation, we have the principles of interconnection, and we also have a specific regulation for interconnection, where we try to bring the situations and what will happen when the grids arrive, and also the provision for compensation to the distributor when the grid arrives. And also we try to bring together with this regulation contract model for the interconnection and other forms or documents that will be important to consider when we talk about this regulation. When I interview on the first time, I forgot to mention that we have some mini grids that are contributing very much to the electrification around the country. Up to date, the mini grids are developed by FUNAI, our energy fund. But with this legal framework, our expectation is also to have interested investors that will come to the field and invest in mini grids. We are preparing our electrification master plan for off-grid in order to map, identify the sites, and bring more clarity to where the investors can come. We have some programs running, some international partners interested to finance the mini grid program, has BRIO, BGFA, as well as Get Fit for off-grid. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Just as a follow-up question before I come to you, Patrick, to both Thelma and Isaiah. Tom, in the question and answer chat, asks, is there room for PPPs, public-private partnership, in developing these mini grids? That's question number one. I would like you, Isaiah, to just take it on. And also, Thelma, is there room for utilities to engage their businesses into developing of off-grid solar systems, or indeed any other renewable energy systems other than individual companies? Let's start with you, Isaiah. Have you ever thought about establishing PPPs in the development of off-grid solar systems and any other systems, indeed? Or is it preserved specifically for the individual companies? Isaiah.
Right. I think the issue of public-private partnerships is something that has not been fully developed, but we do have cases where the private sector has come to the party in terms of putting up the grid where they have a need. For example, what I'm saying is that because of electricity challenges that companies do have, you have a situation whereby if one puts up a plant, the responsibility of putting the line normally rests with the utility. But because the utility doesn't probably have sometimes the funding, you then have that partnership where the private company does then develop that line. Of course, it then reverts back to be owned by the utility. So we have that kind of relationship and agreements, which then govern then the relationship between the private sector and the utility on the other hand, as to who then owns what and who has what kind of responsibilities and up to what point. So there is those kind of agreements that come in. In terms of well, whether you call it private-public partnerships, whether that could fit in there, we have mini grids that are being developed by private sector, of course, and supplying the power to the grid. And then, of course, the grid then, the utility then honoring the payment from that end. In terms of whether we can get the utility to develop some of these projects, what we find is that sometimes we have a crowding out effect that you have coming up from the public sector, as it were. And sometimes they might not actually have the funding to be able then to carry out some of these projects. We feel that sometimes it's better for investment to be put into the grid in terms of its maintenance and its and its extension to allow more renewables to be taken up through the grid, as opposed to, and also maybe making the grid a lot more smart to be able to take on additional renewables, as opposed to maybe developing plans that then, and whilst on the other side you have a grid which is also a bit of an inefficient, as it were. So yeah, I would say those are my comments on those two for now. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Isaiah. And Thelma, just briefly, we have less than 10 minutes now. So briefly, the same question. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, on the utility question, it's an interesting approach. I was reading the material provided by you, and I could see that probably this would be a very interesting approach, considering the fact that the purpose of the utility is to assure that there is a specific purpose vehicle or a specific company that will always assure that there is electricity on the site, wherever wherever it happened with the other providers. Probably it would be an approach to start. Myself personally, and we did not thought on this before, but I think we can start discussing and understand exactly how it will work, and probably try to see the models around the countries with similarity of ours, and see how we can implement. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. To you, Patrick, we know from industry practice that data and analytics is very important. So now the utilization of data and analytics can help a lot of off-grid solar companies to understand customer behavior and so on and so forth. how widely used are things such as smart metering, remote monitoring, data-driven insights? How widely used are these in the industry in which you operate? Have we reached yet a stage where we can introduce remote metering and remote interventions in order to, to ensure that we are operating in an optimal environment? How widely used are the data and analytics space in the space that you operate? Patrick?
Thank you. That's actually a really good question. And I think, let me say, not enough. I think what we are aware of, particularly when you look at the level of data, and let me focus on solar home systems for now.
Yes.
Particularly for solar home systems where the companies that are providing it, and if they are on the pay-as-you-go model, whether it's in productive use like irrigation or it's in the lighting, you need to be able to know if the system is working, and in some cases provide some type of interventions before you send somebody. So you're able to tell, for example, how much energy was generated, the status of the system, the usage patterns by the customers, when they use those products, and what type of energy demand or consumptions would be happening in the daytime and in the nighttime. And all this, and you end up getting a lot of data. However, to be able to now aggregate that data, for example, now requires that you have to have that infrastructure to allow that data to come back to wherever your collection point is. Otherwise, it's sitting, in this case, it may be sitting in the customer system, but if you don't have that back, that data connection back, which becomes an infrastructure question, then you have all this potential data, but you cannot access it or use it unless somebody's paying for it. And then in terms of the broader ecosystem, are we able to create incentives or a way now to allow for that data sharing, both back and forth, which is, for the customer, from the policy side, the ecosystem side, be it the regulator or for the companies that may be able to also use that data to know better how they can improve the services of to their consumers, if there's education or other things that could be done, if there's available power that may not be being tapped, or even as you go toward productive use assets, where you can understand what is the time of the use of this energy, what is the type of loads, so that you design actually more products that are fit for the use consumptions. I think we've seen this in the replacement of diesel and petrol generators. It's a new initiative that, by understanding how much energy is actually used by the small businesses, and when they use that energy, then you can avoid oversizing your batteries or your systems, or undersizing it, so that the businesses have the right level of power that they need for when they need it. And it's not too expensive, it is not too small, but it's just right. So I think my short answer is not yet. There's lots of opportunity, but we're yet to really tap that fully.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Now, briefly, we have about 3 to 4 minutes before we conclude our session. Thelma and Isaiah, just indicate to the audience. Thelma, you mentioned the fact that you have got certification in your legal framework. You've got certification of equipment, but I would like to find out, do you have specific standards for the industry? This question goes both to Thelma and Isaiah. Specific solar, off-grid solar systems standards. Do you have those or not yet? Thelma and then Isaiah.
Yes, as I mentioned, we approved the regulation for technical norms and security. In this regulation, we adopted the norms of International Commission of Electrotechnique, and there are some standards that they already approved, and we adopted. In general, are the ones that are already used in other countries. So what we need is to they should present certification that has these standards. Let's see in a short.
All right, thank you. Isaiah?
Yes, we do have standards that we have adopted. We have adopted the IEC standards on solar products. The challenge that we have is standards are always voluntary. The issue becomes the implementation of those standards. And what we have done is we've tried to craft regulations to ensure enforcement of those standards. Unfortunately, that work is hindered at the moment because we have to go backwards and amend the existing regulations to enable us then to have regulations on the enforcement of the standards. By that, I mean we need to amend existing electricity regulations to recognize also the fact that you can actually generate power from, solar and other sources as well, so that at least, you can now go out there and enforce the regulations. Otherwise, it's just really a question of us as a country making sure that people are aware that you can import using existing, using the international standards, which are also now domesticated.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So from this group, let me just make some concluding remarks. I know that there are a lot of questions. Thelma, Patrick, and Isaiah, please look through the questions, and if you can provide some responses, that would be great. Now, in conclusion, we know that off-grid solar systems have immense potential, especially here in Africa and the other developing countries, to transform the lives of millions of people by providing clean and sustainable energy. However, realizing this potential requires the establishment of sustainable and scalable business models. So by focusing on financing mechanisms, appropriate product offerings, partnerships, data-driven approaches, off-grid solar companies can build economically viable and impactful ventures, advancing the transition towards a sustainable and inclusive energy future. Thank you very much. I want to hand over back to Professor Ignacio. Take it over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you to all the panelists. I think that I have nothing to say. We have a coffee break now of 10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Ignacio, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Raihan. This is Raihan. Yeah.
Okay, you have finished your meeting.
I did not finish it, but I came in because this is important.
Okay, please stop the music. Yes, Raihan?
Yes. So what I was saying is this the same link where I should stay for the next session?
Yes, because the normal participants cannot speak. So you're fine.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that I'm in the right site.
Yes, you are in the right place. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We can go ahead with the music.
Oh, that was not my music. Someone else from your team.
Yeah, no. I mean, my team.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have had some problems a bit. Can we start?
Sure. You are the moderator.
Okay. Good evening. Good afternoon from this side. My name is Colin Gumbu. I am policy and advocacy manager for Gogla. I'm very humbled today to have this chance to moderate and to be part of these sessions around potential impacts of cross-sectoral or indirect regulation in investment and growth for standalone solar industry, including productive use. So the session today is all about is a small twist from what we know from the normal or the traditional regulations, where we are talking of regulations such as quality standards, so tax regulation that affect directly the standalone solar sector. So today, a bit we want to discuss those regulations that are coming from other sectors, say financial regulations, or which are coming from ICT sector, those which are coming maybe from US. How can they have an impact on the standalone solar sector? So together with me today, I have like three great minds to contribute to this session. So first of all, we have Marian Walpert from Simu Solar. Marian, if you can talk a bit. Marian? I can see Marian, maybe she has not yet joined us. But also today in the session, we have Pepin Chot from Tetra Tech. Pepin, if you can talk a little and introduce yourself.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and good morning for those who are wherever in the world. I'm Pepin Chouate, working as a senior energy sector advisor for Tetra Tech, and happy to be here. And I'm thanking the African School of Regulation and Google to invite me to this session.
Thanks, Pepin. Yep. And last we have Mary Githinji from World Resource Institute. Mary?
Yeah, hi everyone. I hope you're all doing well. My name is Mary Githinji. I am the Senior Engagement Manager for the Clean Energy Transition in Africa at the World Resources Institute. Happy to be here with you this evening, and I look forward to the chat. Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, Mary. I think let's go straight to the subject matter. Pepin, having worked on policy and regulatory, having dealt with policy and regulatory issues affecting the off-grid sector for many, many years, can you please set a tone of today's discussion? Provide the overview of what you've been seeing in the market in terms of these cross-sectoral or indirect regulations that at the end of the day spill over to the off-grid sector. Pepin, back to you.
Thank you very much, Collins. I followed the previous session, and it was really like looking into the direct standard regulations on the off-grid sector. But over the years, what we have seen is that there are a series of regulations in the countries, which, for example, the financial regulation, the micro leasing regulations. It can be also the micro finance institution regulation. It can be data protection. It can be regulation in the digital sector. in the digital sector. It can be also for mobile money regulations, but which will affect the off-grid sector, especially the solar home system, the PEGO system. When you look at, for example, like in some countries, the PEGO system is considered or can be interpreted by some tax officer as providing loans, just because they're allowing the customers to pay over time in installment. They just look at it as, oh no, you are providing loans, and so on. And this type of interpretation can really ruin the sector. It impacts the sector. We have seen also like the VAT regulations, for example, in Uganda, where companies, solar home system companies, were also, because the VAT is not being applied on payment, so they have to pay upfront as soon as they sell an equipment. They have to pay the VAT on the complete, the whole amount, whereas they are receiving on the deposit. And sometimes the deposit can be, just imagine if the deposit is lower than the VAT on the whole amount. So you see the company now having problem paying more that month, or that for that specific product, paying more than what they have received. And this has, for example, in Uganda, let's say, force some companies, some solar home system company, to split themselves and have a second wing of the company that is working at its register as a microfinance institution. And that microfinance institution will be paying the complete amount of the product to the solar home system company, and then receive the installment back from the customer, on which, because it is considered as on which there is no VAT. So you see how this is another example how a regulation that is not in the energy sector is really affecting the business in the off-grid sector. You look at the data protection, and I just named Uganda, but you see all these in several countries. But some countries look into, for example, VAT and allow companies to be paying the VAT only on installment. But we always see, even like in Zambia, where companies said, yes, this is written in the law, but we are still being forced by the revenue authority to pay up.
Have we lost Pepin? Oh, it's only me.
Me
No,
too.
I also don't hear him. I also don't hear him.
Pepin, we can't hear you. If you can check your connection and your audio system. While we wait for Popin to come on board again, Marian, please introduce yourself. We missed you in the first place.
Yes, I'm sorry. I took a little bit longer than 10 minutes on the break between sessions, so sorry about that. Yes, very happy to be here with you. I appreciate the opportunity. It's great to have coverage of some of these really important issues that are impacting the sector. So I'm Marianne Wolpert. I'm co-CEO, co-founder of Simu Solar. Simu Solar has been operating in Tanzania for 10 years now. And we also have another company in Uganda called Tulima Solar. So Simu Solar is focused on productive use equipment, standalone off-grid solar-powered productive use equipment, and specifically in the agriculture sector. So we are providing a range of solar water pumps and solar fishing lights. And we're full service, design, installation. We provide financing and after-sales service. So do you want me to just go ahead through answering the questions, Colin, or shall I just leave it there?
Yeah, Pepin, are you back? We still can't hear him, right?
Doesn't appear so, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So, Marian, then maybe let's come to you. From what you have said, looks like Simu Solar, the company that you are managing, is focusing on productive use, solar water pumps and the like. But you have also had some experience working on standalone solar in general. Pepin has been giving us the overview of what do we mean by this cross-sectoral regulation that can spill over to the sector. Marian, can you give specific example now? What are these regulations are we talking about that you have seen happening maybe in Tanzania or in Uganda or wherever that you have been operating? Marian?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for the question. So there are some regulations enacted that relate to solar water pumps specifically, and some that relate to the solar fishing lights specifically. So, for example, I would just say something about the importance of solar water pumps, where really they have such a huge impact on food security, adaptation to climate change, incomes of smallholder farmers who are forming the base of the rural economy. So the importance of solar water pumps is really quite significant in East Africa in particular. Currently, farmers' productivity is quite low, in part because they rely on rain and they don't have equipment for irrigation. And as we all know, with climate change, the rainfall patterns are changing, which is threatening both food security and rural incomes. So basically, there are some policies in Uganda that have been very favorable to the increased use and uptake of solar water pumps. They're really promoting adaptation of solar water pumps. They have waived the import duty and VAT on solar-powered irrigation systems to make them much more affordable to end users. Tanzania, in contrast, does not have any VAT and exemptions, any tax exemptions on solar water pumps, which is something we've been pushing for years now. But in spite of the importance of this technology for smallholder farmers in rural communities, we still have not been able to get that tax exemption. That tax exemption is huge, right? That can reduce basically that adds an additional 50% onto the cost of the systems. So in addition, in Uganda, they have a subsidy on solar-powered small-scale irrigation systems, 75% subsidy through a government program funded by the World Bank. It's a 3-year program targeting 10,000 farmers. So it's a really big policy program to try to increase the use of solar water pumps. And there's another program that they have to encourage smallholders to use funds from, it's a program called the Parish Development Model, which is giving individuals, 1 to 2 million Ugandan shillings, which is a significant amount of money towards subsidizing, again, solar water pump to increase the productivity of their farms. So yeah, by contrast, Tanzania, we don't have anything specific on reduction in any kind of rebate, no tax credits. There is a big push to increase agricultural productivity in Tanzania. World Bank is funding a large irrigation scheme. We're really hoping there might be some carve out for the smaller, it's called farmer-led irrigation development, where the farmers are buying their own systems. It's much more economical than the big irrigation schemes, but big projects have their own appeal. So, and also there's a big program called Building a Better Tomorrow in Tanzania, which is also focused on bringing younger farmers into the sector. So with respect to solar fishing lights now, I can say that in Uganda, on the other hand, solar fishing lights are banned completely. So what that means is that the nighttime fishers are using kerosene lanterns, which are, toxic and dangerous. So whereas in Tanzania, we've been selling solar fishing lights since 2016. It was off to a slow start. Everybody was using kerosene lanterns at the time. And then, we've had just all kinds of policy fluctuations there. There was a ban impacted in 2018. It took us almost a year to get permission to sell the solar fishing lights. And then the government funded some studies. They made a policy about, what size, what wattage of light and how many lights per boat. So very clear policy about the use of solar fishing lights. So then, Siemens Solar spent a bunch of money developing a new light to meet those requirements to introduce to the market. And then the government turns around and says, no, you can't introduce a new light. There's got to be a new study. There's got to be, changes to the policy or whatever. So it is creating a very uncertain regulatory environment, which is really challenging for our business. So, and I think that's kind of the next question. I might also just point to one thing that Pepin had raised, which is this issue about financing. So we do offer financing. We're always looking to find microfinance institutions that could work with us to provide the financing, because we certainly don't consider that our core business. But unfortunately, we have to provide the financing because we have yet to align with any partners, although we might be getting close. But it's been a challenge because even the microfinance institutions have been reluctant to finance farmers, right? Small businesses is one thing, but farmers, the risks are quite high. So that's been a challenge for us. And of course, Tanzania came out with the Microfinance Act, which so far does not apply to the PAYGO companies. So we're also a PAYGO company. We have data collected on all of our systems. We're directly connected to them in monitoring payments, as well as performance of all of our solar water pumps. Unfortunately, the Microfinance Act does not yet have any part of it that covers pay-as-you-go technology. So we're waiting to see if that does turn out to be a big issue for us or not. So I would say that's some examples of cross-sector policies that we've experienced.
Yeah, before I turn to Marian, I have like a bonus question for you. From your observation and experience, what can you say? Are these regulations target off-grid sector, or we are just being affected unintentionally?
Well, I mean, solar fishing lights are off-grid products, right? Just like solar home systems, only they're very specific for fishing. They're productive use. They're things that help the fishers to earn more money. So that's like sort of the definition of productive use, making these small businesses more efficient. So yeah, since it's a solar fishing light, I would say it's clearly targeting off-grid solar, right? Because that's what the product is, and there's nothing else in that category. With the water pumps, it's a little bit different. Again, Uganda has clearly offered rebates on solar water pumps. For Tanzania, they could specify solar water pumps, but basically they're not allowing any kind of tax rebates on any water pumps. So whether it's not directly targeting off-grid solar systems in that sense, but it's covering solar water pumps as well as other water pumps, all water pumps in this category, whether they're used for irrigation or not. Although complete irrigation systems, if you bring it in with sprinklers or drip, those do get some tax breaks. But if you're just bringing in solar water pumping systems, which is what most of the farmers can afford, it's hard to also add drip or sprinklers because that can as much as double the cost. So yeah, it's the water pump regulations go beyond just solar.
Thanks, Marian, for that recollection. Pepin, are you back? Pepin?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. If you can now conclude on what you've been saying.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that some of other regulation. We mentioned the financial regulation, but there are also regulations for data protection, personal data protection that can affect the companies, off-grid companies, and in some countries just obliging them to let's say having a storage center in the country, and some of them are working across several countries and are normally in their business plan have their storage in the cloud using the cloud system to store all the data, but some countries do not accept that with their data protection regulations. And I mentioned also mobile money regulation when some taxes are being introduced on the mobile in the mobile money regulation, mobile lending, and so on. It also affects the companies because many of the companies are using mobile money. The clients are using mobile money to pay. So at the end of the day, it increases the prices of the final price of the product. Yes, that's in a nutshell overview, those sectors that are not really from the energy sector, but which are decisions that are taken in the countries and which off-grid companies have to deal with. I will pause now and maybe come back with some questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Pepin. Thanks. So let me come to Mary. Mary, from what we've been hearing from Pepin and Marian, it is clear that this cross-sector regulation have had some impact to the sector in terms of bringing uncertainty, investment, but also the growth. Can you describe what has been now the response of the industry towards advocating for for favorable environment where such regulation will not impact the sector? Mary?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. I think that, sector advocacy on the sector, on the challenges that both Pepin and Marian have referred to has been quite interesting and detailed, and every issue, every advocacy issue, or every challenge that businesses encounter in deploying off-grid solutions sometimes needs a different lens to see how do you address the different challenges encountered. So, for example, looking at solar, the fishing lights and how they are categorized and how they are then regulated upon is very different, for example, from looking at the digital regulations and what you need to comply in that particular moment, or microfinance regulations, for instance. And so in my experience so far in supporting the sector, what I've seen work is that it's really important to have some evidence that helps to understand and unpack these challenges as they affect not just one business, but how do they affect the joint, the various businesses that are impacted. So how does the off-grid sector then put together a case, for example, to address an issue on Forex, for example, or an issue on digital lending and how it applies. So evidence for me is always a starting point, and the evidence needs to showcase not only what the problem is, but how does a problem affect the much needed delivery of energy access for the communities that we serve? And can we show that the various regulations, so for example, when you say the way you regulate microfinance institutions also applies to the off-grid solar sector, what does that actually mean? And can we work with the policymakers so that they get to understand that the regulation, although it was looking at a cross-sectoral function, has a very specific impact to this goal that we have as African countries to deliver energy access for people, and off-grid being a key mechanism to do that. So for me, number one is always the right evidence. The second thing is that you cannot address this on your own. So for example, if Gogla is going to engage with government on a particular challenge, then we need to partner with, you need to partner with the right organization in the specific country. So if it's Tanzania, I'm assuming you would partner with TAREA, for example, in Kenya with KEREA and the like, and have that private sector association in country own and lead this particular advocacy and package it in a way that it comes as, this is the impact for the sector, this is why we are concerned, and this is the challenge. And I think the third thing is not just Gogla and the industry association, but also the other stakeholders who are working in that particular market need to be involved through either coalitions or, and they don't have to be formal coalitions. You know, when we say coalitions, it might be this big formal thing, but can we have friendly coalitions where we work together and we leverage our different and individual strengths in the conversation with government. I think the better we are at getting government to understand that the policy framework as designed or as implemented actually impacts on the goals and the target that we have as countries, and that we can show it through numbers. We can say this particular regulation, for example, is costing us X. And because it's costing us X, the particular solar home systems that would have costed I don't know, 1,000 USD, for example, if it's a big system, would now cost 1,200, and the 200 or the 300 per consumer amounts to this amount of money, and then we lose this in terms of the time to deliver and meeting this particular goal. So I think it's both evidence, working together with others, coalitions, and getting government to understand and to see the problems as we see them as private sector who is delivering energy access and helping government to actually do their job or meet their commitment in terms of delivering energy access and to our rural populations especially. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, maybe Mary, before you leave, would you mind to give a specific example that you've been working on in terms of now reacting to a sort of regulation that has been impacting the sector? What did you do? I mean, can you just pick one example, Mary?
Great. So I mean, in my over the last about 3 years, I've been supporting the off-grid solar sector, advocate tax changes across different countries. And I think for me, the one regulation that is really close to my heart and I think still needs a lot of effort is access to Forex. Access to Forex for both Ethiopia and Zimbabwe have been challenges that I supported quite closely. And I think what we did in the instance when I worked at ACF, I worked alongside the sector actors. So in Zimbabwe, we worked, I see as I on the call, we worked with RIAs. And in Ethiopia, we worked with ESEDA. And the advocacy was twofold. First, getting the evidence right. What is the evidence that needs to address the macroeconomic challenge that we have on Forex that impacts then private sector delivery of energy access? It affects being able to